Hello, this is Councillor Pauline Cowper, and I'm chairing the Morden Community Forum tonight. And welcome to any of you who are joining us on YouTube. I don't know if you want me to go through the people who are here, Chris, at the moment.
You can do introductions. Yes, that would be great.
Right. Well, we've got the present leader of the council, Stephen Allen Britus, Councillor Peter Southgate, Councillor Nick McLean, and I believe Councillor Daniel Holden. And that's all I can see at the moment. So
you've Councillor Nick Draper, Councillor Peter Southgate as well.
Yeah, I've said Peter. I forgot Nick of all people. Anyway,
and Councillor Crowe too, please.
Councillor Crowe, yes.
Yeah.
That he I hadn't seen, so that's very remiss of me.
We're just being joined by Councillor Foley as well.
Yes, I think I've got the lot of you here. Right. Yeah. We have got the Director of Environment here, but he's coming in later. He's on another meeting at the moment. That's the welcome and introduction. The first item on the agenda is an update from the current leader of the council, Stephen Allen Britus. So, Stephen.
Thank you, Pauline, and thank you for all being present here. I want to thank all the councillors who are here because I know they all care about Morden and about Merton. So thank you all for being here. What I intend to do, this is my annual state of play at the Community Forum, and I want to cover COVID pandemic first, and then I'll cover some non-COVID issues, and then happy to take questions, Madam Chair. Sadly, here in Merton, 205 people have passed away as a result of COVID, and our thoughts and prayers are with the families, colleagues, relatives of those who have lost these loved ones. And I know that you all join with me in expressing our condolences. We also know that COVID-19 has had and continues to have a disproportionate impact on our BAME community here in the London Borough of Merton, which comprises around 38% of the population. So we are doing a piece of work to look at the lived experience of our BAME community, not only with regard to COVID, but with regard to all other issues. And we want to clamp down on inequalities, on discrimination, and have a fair borough. One of the things we recognised very early on is the need to acknowledge, recognise the bravery of one particular person. That's Patrick Hutchinson, and you all know that he was attending a protest, a march with regard to Black Lives Matters, and one of these anti-protesters was in danger of their life, and without thinking for his own life, Patrick Hutchinson safeguarded and saved this person. When I found out that Patrick, although he lives in Croydon, that he works here in Merton, I thought it important that we take on a mantle and recognise his bravery. So we are working with the London Borough of Croydon, where he lives, and our officers are working to see whether we can get a bravery award for this very, very brave man who did this utmost human kind act, and that's what we're doing. Now, the council has been supporting, shielding over 7,000 people who have needed that support, and I want to thank all the officers who've been doing that in liaison with the government and with the NHS with regard to the support that they've been receiving. We have redeployed. I also want to thank all our staff, especially those that we have redeployed and those who put their hand up to be redeployed to help with COVID-19 pandemic. One set of those workers has been our bailiffs, who one would normally see as turning up on doors, knocking on those doors and presenting a writ or a demand for monies. Well, as a result of our redeployment of this group of workers, they're not turning up demanding money. They have been turning up with food parcels for people, and that's an example of the flexibility and the redeployment that we've undertaken. I want to thank those people, including our mascot staff, who do such good work for elderly people. We've had support from food banks, and one of those run by Don's Local Action Group with their premises, their headquarters at the Old Ruts in Merton Park. And again, a big thank you to them. And a big thank you to Morden Voluntary Service Council with their headquarters at Vestry Hall and the hub there that is helping a lot of people. With regard to PPE, which was a big issue, but I think is now being resolved, barring any issues with the second wave that we seem to be seeing. With regard to PPE, Merton has given over 2 million items of free PPE to our care homes and to other providers, as well as enjoining a major contract procurement exercise with all 32 other boroughs, and in the purchase of 50 million items of PPE. And so, again, that's the power of working together with other boroughs across political parties. With thanks to the government for providing funds to accommodate 52 rough sleepers. That's the number we've accommodated. There are about 6 who have refused that help. That is up to them. We urge them to take advantage of this offer, but they decided to stay on the streets, and we weren't in a position to force them into accommodation. But I want to thank the government for providing that accommodation funding, and I would urge them now that the funding continues, and I know these are difficult times, so that these 52 don't go back onto the streets, that the funding continues for that accommodation, and we're working with the government on that aspect. Our schools are open in Morden. Morden Library is now open. The Garth Road recycling facility is open, but you do have to book during the weekdays. But Saturdays and Sundays, 8 o'clock in the morning onwards, you can turn up without having to pre-book. All our park facilities are now open. Our leisure centre is open again. That does need pre-booking. But if you haven't got access to the internet or to a mobile phone, you can turn up, and staff will help you to book and take payment. We have agreed an emergency transport strategy to encourage people to move away from their car and to use cycling, walking and other modes of transport. The government has urged us to do that, and the government has provided funding to do that. And one of those streams of funding is with regard to school streets. And I know there are some issues with residents living in those streets, but we have sent out the letters informing them that without a fee they are able to register for exemption. And so Aragon, Hillcross, Malmesbury, St Teresa's, Merton Park, Primary, Poplar and Rutledge are all part of this measure to try and safeguard children, so that when they're dropped off and when they're picked up, there aren't cars idling about. So the ethos, the meaning, the reason, the mischief we're trying to get at is a worthy one, but we do have to deal with our residents, to explain that to them. And the government has asked us to switch over the consultation process. Normally we would consult about an issue and then implement, but the government on this occasion has said, no, you will implement and consult whilst the implementation process is happening, so that people can see the reason it's been done and can feel and touch and smell the issues that surround this. A lot of residents are perplexed, but we're explaining the situation of the type of consultation that these special measures are having to undertake. Now, I want to thank Merton Mutual Aid, who have covered Morden as well, Age UK Merton for all their work, and I want to thank all the councillors, Cannon Hill, St Helier, Lower Morden, Ravensbury, Merton Park. You're all here. I want to thank you for all your efforts. And also, of course, thank our champion members of Parliament, both Stephen Hammond MP and Siobhan McDonough. Stephen covers Merton Park, as we know. In Morden, I know he covers the whole of Wimbledon, and Siobhan McDonough covers obviously Mitcham, but also covers Morden. And I know they've been working together, and I know they've raised issues about the pandemic, and I want to thank them as well. One of the things we have done, and with thanks to the government again for providing the funding, is come to the help of small businesses, in particular with grants. The government has provided the money, but one of the good things about Merton, with thanks to everyone for sending in information about the businesses that are deserving, for example, we've managed to become third in London of all 33 boroughs in terms of speed with which we allocated those funds. And we've not kept a penny, we've not sent any money back to the government. We've used up all that money. We would have welcomed a bit more, especially on the discretionary side, but we've helped as many as we can, and hopefully the Chancellor has explained that there may be some more monies for employees in particular this time, but I'm sure there'll be money for hospitality, and there has been money for the cultural sector as well. And although this isn't Wimbledon, and we're talking about Morden, nevertheless, the cultural offer of Wimbledon Book Fest has been recognised today, and they've achieved a grant from the cultural monies provided by the government. And as you all know, Wimbledon Book Fest is hugely supported by the council, and long may that continue. And of course, Wimbledon Music Fest as well. With regard to the current situation with COVID, and we have an issue, we have an update from Barry Causa. Although Merton and Sutton are at the lowest rung amongst the 32 London boroughs, including the City of London Corporation, the infections are going up. We mustn't be complacent. We mustn't try and seek a deal that is only for South London because we are okay. We must be in tune with the whole of London as we seek support and protection from COVID. And we will continue to do as much as we can on that score. We are low infections, but they are going up, and that is the big worry. But we will continue to do our best to protect our residents in liaison with all our councillors and our staff. Now, turning to non-COVID issues, with regard to some Morden issues in particular, Bishopsford Bridge, we are very hopeful that it goes to planning next week, and then the contractor is chosen, and then hopefully we will have a brand new bridge, not a repair, a new bridge in the spring of 2021. With regard to Morden Town Centre, COVID has impacted on the market for our regeneration development plans for Morden Town Centre. But again, we are hopeful that come spring of 2021, we will be in a position to begin our work on the regeneration here in Morden Town Centre. With regard to St Helier Hospital, I know there are differences between ourselves as a council and our opposition. There is an investment of £500 million for health services here in the southwest, and we do welcome that investment. There's no doubt about that. £500 million is good money, but we as a council would urge the independent reconfiguration panel, who are now looking at this at the behest of the Secretary of State, that any downgrading of services at St Helier do not take place, and that there is, if this money is available, and I understand it is, that the majority hospital, the main hospital, should be at St Helier, but certainly no denuding of services such as the A&E moving to Belmont or maternity services. I know there are differences. I will plan a way through those, but we do have a very, very soft spot for St Helier Hospital that serves the most deprived part of our borough. Other non-COVID items, obviously the big one is AFC Wimbledon, and I know there is all-party support. I remember the motion passed in 2012-13, all-party support for the return of AFC Wimbledon to Morden. And we're all very, very delighted that that is happening. I understand that the stadium is nearly finished. It may be handed to the club by the 25th of October, and the club has spelt out a date of the 3rd of November for a football match, a professional league football match, sadly behind closed doors with no crowd, on the 3rd of November, I think against Doncaster Rovers. So good luck to them. And I know that we'll be working with the Wimbledon Park councillors, where the club will be, although given the boundary changes, I think it will move into a new ward called the Wandle. And that can be easily translated into the Womble. one never knows, the club in the Wandle on the Womble. But yes, working together, we can do much more in terms of regeneration for that area. I know there are 800 housing units, and I know that others will want to come to that hub. One of the beauties of the new club is they do have a conference facility for over 500 people. It's something we have been lacking in this borough. As you know, Wandsworth do great work with their hospitality for christenings, weddings, engagements, and we need to be up there with them. It may not belong to the borough, it belongs to AFC Wimbledon, but we may have a venue now in the borough to do, once COVID is over and out the way, or under control with a vaccine, and I'm sure that the club will look kindly on community use in that space as well. And finally, from me, Madam Chair, we have a new mayor of the borough. That is a Lower Morden councillor, and that is Councillor Sally Kenny. And I would urge everyone to look out for her appointments, support her fundraising efforts. These are difficult times, but the previous mayor, Councillor Janice Howard, proved that despite these difficulties and the lack of physicality, that you can raise good money, and she raised an astronomical, unless I'm corrected, 99 to 100,000 pounds, and Sally has begun on that trail. That's it from me, Madam Mayor. Very happy to take questions from councillors and or the public.
Any questions, anybody?
Chris, if you can deal with questions, if there are any.
Yeah, so there's it's a question from Councillor Crowe. Could the leader say a little more about the impact of COVID on the redevelopment of Morden Town Centre?
Yes, so I have a note because I knew, obviously Morden Town Centre is very important to us. So I have a note from Future Merton. So I've urged officers to continue to work with colleagues at TfL, Transport for London. As we all know, the one side of Morden Town High Street is owned by the council. That's the side of Ganley's and La Lavella. The other side, the tube side, is owned primarily by Transport for London. And so we're working with them to consider the opportunities for taking this to the market. But as Stephen is suspecting, COVID has impacted on the speed with which we're progressing, because the market is slightly pulling back, or is not quite ready given COVID. But despite that, we know everyone is keenly awaiting the development. We're working up options that would see the regeneration come spring 21 begin. So we've not sat back, but the market is tetchy in terms of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Or is that satisfactory, Stephen?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Cooper.
Right. Anybody else? Okay. In that case, item 3 is emissions-based parking charges consultation, and this is coming in from Ben Stevens, who is the head of parking services. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, just mention that Chris Lee will be given a little bit more background to my presentation that I will give in a few minutes, and I'll be detailing some of the how these new proposals will work on a day-to-day basis and where we can get more information. But I'll pass over to Chris Lee at the moment just to put the presentation into some context, if I could, Chair.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Chair. So I'll just spend a few moments covering 3 points, if I could. The first of those is around why are we consulting on new parking charges, given that we consulted on some only 18 months ago. The second point I wanted to cover is around the pandemic and COVID and what impact that's having on transport. And the third point is around the approach that we're adopting, and then Ben will go into that approach in a little bit more detail. But first, I wanted to touch upon the first point I mentioned. Why are we consulting, and why now? Well, we're consulting now because we always expected that we would want to consult around emissions-based charging. And we flagged that up when we consulted on the charges some 18 months ago. And at that point in time, our systems weren't capable of dealing with the complexity of emissions-based charging, but they are now, and we're able to introduce them. And we know that emissions-based charging was part of the response that we got back from residents when we consulted on those charges some 18 months, 2 years ago, and that the public wanted to see a fairer system that reflected the real emissions that vehicles generated. So we always expected to come back and consult on this, and the need to consult on revised charges hasn't changed, and that's based upon firstly our legal duty with regards to air quality, because London's air quality is still not meeting the right standard. Secondly, we have a public health duty, which we need to meet. And I know that Barry Causer, if he was here this evening, would be talking about that at this point. We also have a newly adopted climate change strategy to deal with the carbon emissions in the borough, which sets demanding targets for the borough in terms of vehicle emissions and the carbon that's generated from transport. And as I said, the motorists, when they responded to the first round of consultation, said that they wanted to see something that reflected the real life emissions and to adopt the sort of polluter pays principle. And we recognise that some diesel vehicles, for which we have a diesel levy at the moment, are not as polluting as some petrol vehicles. And so we want to have something more sophisticated to reflect that. The second point I wanted to touch upon briefly is around the pandemic and COVID, because that, you might say, has completely changed the game in that public transport is no longer available for people to use. And that's true to an extent in that the capacity is reduced, but that's a temporary arrangement, and we expect that public transport will get back to its normal capacity, and London will be able to enjoy it in the way that it did before the pandemic. And we know that before the pandemic, air quality levels were incredibly poor, and for a brief period in lockdown, they improved. They improved much more in central London than they did in outer London, and indeed the analysis shows that the reduction in outer London was far less significant than we might imagine in terms of improvements in air quality. And we know that more recently, the air quality has deteriorated further, and that outer London is suffering increased levels of vehicle movement, even above and beyond the level that we had before the pandemic. Some estimates are that we are having about 150% of the vehicle movements that we had before the pandemic in outer London. And the third point I wanted to touch upon was around the approach that we're taking, because the approach that Ben will go through in a little bit of detail is to build on the foundation that we've already established, which is to have a set of charges which reflect motorists' proximity to available transport. So if you are very close to a very good train station with a tube station in there, such as Wimbledon, the charges would be slightly higher than where you are much further away from that good transport accessibility. And secondly, we're seeking to adopt an approach that most London boroughs have adopted around emissions-based charging. So reflecting the DVLA, the Driving Vehicle Licensing Agency's approach to taxation on vehicles to reflect those emissions. The final point I wanted to make is in response to a number of questions that have come up at these forums about those motorists who just drive through the borough, aren't resident here, don't buy a resident permit, and don't stop here. Why aren't we dealing with those motorists? Because they cause pollution. And of course they do, but we don't have the powers to deal with those motorists. So what we're seeking to do is to use our powers that are available as a local authority proportionately to seek to nudge behaviour to deal with the public health issues, the air quality issues, and the carbon emission issues that we face as a borough, and to present those for consultation. So at that point, Chair, I'll hand over to Ben, who'll put some slides up and just run through a bit more detail of the approach that we're proposing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
So thank you, Chair. We'll go through these slides, and many of the points that Chris has mentioned will be on these slides. So it can be used as a standalone presentation as well. So first of all, one of the key things that we are not going to change, and we mentioned this early, is, for example, there's 20-minute free parking bays at a number of locations in the borough. Well, we're not looking to change that policy at all. And a number of people can apply for a permit free of charge if they are blue badge holders or they need care in their house as well. So permits and concessions that we've already had in place to accommodate those needs, we're not looking to change at all. So they're some of the things that are not involved in this consultation. And first and foremost, it is a consultation. The consultation started on the 10th of September and finishes on the 23rd. So as I go through these slides, and at the end, I will continue to encourage you to go to our webpage and look at the information that we have and explain how you can make representations to our consultation. So thank you. Next slide, Chris, please. Okay. So what is being proposed? I'm going to talk about a polluter pays principle, where a car that emits more emissions would in principle pay a higher charge than a vehicle with better emissions, and they would pay a lesser amount. So it is an emission-based charging model based on the polluter pays principle.
Why is it being proposed? So I'll touch on that again, but again, Chris has talked through the public health need, the air quality and the climate change challenges that are facing us. And cars is a significant part of that challenge as well. So I'll touch on why it's been proposed. I'll go into a little bit of detail about the structure and how it's built up from a local level where you live to looking at emission-based charging and a ULEZ charge where we're looking to have a more intelligent, I suppose, diesel surcharge that actually works well and people are familiar with and TfL use as well. And again, it is a consultation and I'll provide a bit more information about where you can have your say. So thank you, Chris. Okay, so it really is the principle of polluter pays. I touched on this on the last slide, but what is important, it is for all permit charges that we're looking to review. That includes your residential, trade, business, visitor vouchers, scratch cards, etc. So all elements of the permits that we sell, we're looking to review and introduce emission based on it. And also paid for on and off street. And by that we mean on-street parking is outside your local neighbourhood shops or on the high street, for example. And off-street we refer to as our car parks as well, of which we have 14 that we directly manage within the borough, plus a few more. So it is a review of all our parking charges, both on and off street and all permits. Okay, next slide, please, Chris. Okay. So these are some of the facts that we can just have a look at. I don't need to talk you through, but the challenges facing the authority are significant. They are something we need to address. We need to address it now. The council do not want to put off till tomorrow. Action must be prompt and fair and proportionate, some of the words that Chris has used, because these challenges must be addressed: the climate change, the air quality and the public health. So yeah, plenty of examples there of where the challenges that we need to address and the reasons why we need to take some action. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so if these proposals are implemented, what do we hope to, what are the outcomes? Well, of course, COVID at the moment is making sustainable modes of transport, such as public transport, difficult. This is a medium to long-term strategy. So things will get back to some form of normality, one hopes, at some point. And we've got to put in place policy to, with that in mind. So we do want more use of public transport. We believe that people making a choice of maybe walking or cycling will help the health benefits that our public health colleagues are so keen for us, to improve our health and our activity. Air quality, Chris touched on, and again, the activity in outer London still remains high, and it is still an absolute issue for the future. Carbon emissions with the climate change emergency that we've touched upon, and in both the air quality and carbon emissions reports and strategies that we have, there are items in there and action points in there to look at vehicles and what we can do to change driver behaviour. So they're very clear points of action in those strategy policy documents. Quite a lot of uptake of ultra low and electric cars, and there's lots of advertising taking place on TV. What we are looking to do is make sure we have an infrastructure that supports those cars as well. So Future Merton colleagues are doing extensive work in making sure there are enough electronic vehicle charging points throughout the borough. Ultimately, yes, we want to reduce the number of car journeys. We believe the proposals we do will make people think about each journey and consider, is walking, cycling, is using public transport a better and cheaper option.
And quite often we hear to say, I only use my car once a week or twice a week. This is unfair. I'm not polluting that much. There are alternatives. Car clubs are throughout the borough. They are growing, and they are a genuine alternative to owning a car, particularly if you don't use your car that often. So we're looking to champion and make sure everyone is aware of these alternative ways to move around and go around your day-to-day business. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit more about the detail. We introduced in January this year the charges that we consulted on 18 months or so ago. And the charges are primarily based on your relationship or where you live to good or poor public transport, or less good. We really are very lucky in Merton to have a good public transport infrastructure. So they're the charges. They have been introduced in January this year, and they are being worked through. What we want to do is build upon that. So there's two elements. We wish to address the carbon dioxide, and that's the emissions of a vehicle. And what we've done, we've banded the vehicles similar to the vehicle excise duty. So your tax discs, for example. Now they run from band A through to band M. And the more polluting vehicle, a bad polluting vehicle would be a band M, and an electric car, for example, would be band A. So what we've done, we believe we should be charging based on the CO2 emissions of your vehicle. Now that will be on your logbook, and you can find that information on the web as well, or maybe your MOT, for example. And on our web page, we can show the categories, whether you're 100 milligrams per kilometre or 300, for example. You can go onto our webpage and you'd see which band you fall within. Point 3 here is a ULEZ based surcharge. So currently we have a diesel levy surcharge, and any diesel vehicle would be liable to that. But the manufacturers and the technology has moved on. And so, for example, a Euro 6 rated diesel, it's a newer diesel, doesn't give out the particulate matter or the NOxes. It's one of the oxides that damage your health and can affect your lungs, etc. That's going to be replaced now. London Council, not London Councils, Transport for London and the ULEZ surcharge has been in place for a number of years now. So newer based diesel vehicles wouldn't be liable, but the science is out there that some of the older petrol vehicles are actually giving out these emissions that are causing damage, and so they would be liable to the ULEZ surcharge that is replacing. We're proposing to place a diesel surcharge with. I didn't explain that very well. I do accept that. So if there's any questions on it, but that's the principle. The ULEZ based surcharge is also going to be for pay and display. So in our car parks and on our high streets, for example. And what we are proposing there is each time a vehicle parks at one of those locations and it doesn't meet the ULEZ standard, a single surcharge of £1.50 will be liable on each parking payment. So next slide, please, Chris. Okay, so we just talked through an example. This is an Audi A1. It's a 1 litre. It was first registered in 2017. And at the moment, it's in tier 2. So that's got average links to public transport. And the enforcement, the zone is enforced for a medium period of time. So that's traditionally between 4, 5 or 6 hours. And so the current charge for that permit would be £110. What we're looking to do then is apply the CO2 emissions. And this particular vehicle gives out 97 grams per kilometre. Okay, and on our webpage, you can see the table that we set out. And for that vehicle in that location, the charge would actually be £90. It's manufactured in 2017. It's got a good Euro rating, which means it is not liable to the ULEZ charge. So in this case, this particular permit would be £20 cheaper than the current permit price. Like absolutely, if you have a worse polluting vehicle, your permit price may go up, but absolutely as well, if it's good, the price may come down. And again, just to be consistent, example 2 there is for on and off street parking. This is your pays and displays. And I mentioned the £1.50 charge for each parking event if your vehicle doesn't meet the ULEZ standard. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, going back to what Chris mentioned, we are consistent with other London boroughs. I think there's 12 or 13 listed there that have a form of emission-based charging already. I certainly know others are considering it as well. So we are consistent, and this is a way that they see works. We've looked at the data and we believe this is a logical and a proper way forward. Again, we based our model on something that the public are familiar with, and this is the ultra low emission zone. That is a zone, and rather than a charge for being in a parking position, but actually it has made a significant difference with a 65% change in driver behaviour in the first 6 months. But again, people we believe are familiar with the ULEZ principle. And the other, the model that we're looking at is based, and I've touched upon this, is the government tax bands A through to M, depending on the emissions of your vehicle. So hopefully what we've done here is provided a model that people are familiar with, can understand and is consistent with other boroughs as well. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay. I think Chris again touched on this and the activity and the driving of outer London in particular. This slide is about a week to 10 days old, and I think the 110% figure there has potentially risen as well. Again, this is a medium to long-term strategy that we're putting in place, and we are certainly mindful of the COVID-19 issues. But we do need to look to the future as well. Next slide, please. Okay. So the consultation has been open for I guess about 3-4 weeks potentially now. We have had a good number of responses come through. People have completed the online questionnaire. So that's a tick box exercise that we would like you to do, because it provides some vital information of your views, what your preferences is, what you think the council should be doing. And so that's really useful. But also there are some open text fields where we would like you to take some time to think about your concerns, your worries, what you support and what you do not support about these proposals. And again, we'll look through those, and at the end of the process we will write a report. My job to write a report, and that will go through a committee process through December, January time, where it'll go through a due process and it will be scrutinised and decisions will be made. So that's the time scale after the consultation closes on the 23rd. If you can't get to our webpage and do that online, you can of course write to us at Parking Services there, or if email is a preference for you, there is an email down there, Parking Consultation 2020 at merton.gov.uk. So I do urge you to go online, to take time to look at the information, the frequently asked questions there. We've got lots of background information, including the original reports that went to the committees, and hopefully there's enough information there to inform you to make your representations, which we do welcome. So that's it, and we're happy to take questions. Chair, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. I believe I saw a couple of people saying that they'd like to comment, and I think one was Councillor Foley, and the other was Councillor Southgate. I apologise if I've missed it. Oh, right, yes, another one was Councillor Daniel Holden. I think Councillor Holden was first when I saw these comments on chat. So would you like to start, Councillor Holden?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Cowper. My question is, how many people in the Morden area will be affected by these proposals, and how does that compare to A, the number of people in Mitcham who will be affected, and B, the number of people in Wimbledon and the Rains Park area? Thank you.
Okay, so the proposals affect two areas. One is the permits, of course, and one is the pay and display areas and our car parks. So wherever there is a controlled parking zone, those residents will be affected. You know, the borough has a number of controlled zones serving a number of different reasons that have been requested by the residents. So I can certainly provide the numbers of how many residents are in each controlled parking zone. That data is available. Happy to share that with you. I don't know the numbers. Certainly there are a lot of controlled parking zones running through Wimbledon down into Collier's Wood, and it's coming down towards Morden as well. They're the primary areas that there are controlled zones in the borough, and there are some in the Collier's Wood area and Mitcham serving different needs. But I can certainly inform you of how many in each and therefore would be affected. Of course, that's for permits, and then we have pay and display. So where the busiest on-street activity is where people park in the borough, that again you'd be more affected in higher numbers where there is more activity taking place. And again, that's the traditional town centres.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate the numbers and in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Councillor Foley, was it you who had something to ask?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I could just ask, out of the respondents, you said 57% of respondents, do we know the actual numbers of people that did reply to this questionnaire? And also, out of that 57% of people, how many of them actually own cars? Obviously, there are groups like Extinction Rebellion, a lot of anti-car people, but it would be nice to know what the balance is if those people actually have cars and are using them for business. Okay. Sorry, a few questions rolled into one there, Ben.
That's fine. I'll confess my maths isn't brilliant, but there were approximately 3,000 responses to the consultation. So 57% of 3,000. I don't know that answer, but we can get somewhere near it. And how many of those own cars? Potentially we can get that data out because as I said, online we have set questions and we can cross-reference between maybe the age or car owner or not car owner and how each group answered. Certainly we did touch on that quite significantly in the parking charges report of a year, 18 months ago. And I can revisit that, but if we didn't have that exact data, I will look for Chris, who does that type of work for us with the consultations, and see if we can get that out for you.
Thank you. I'd be very grateful, because that would be useful. I think there are going to be a lot of residents complaining about this, and it would be nice to be actual, have those figures of there were car owners in it rather than just people that didn't. But yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
From recollection, I seem to recall about 90% of the respondents were car owners last time round. Right. Maybe a bit heavy, but then how that breaks down into the 57 or not 57, I would need to go back and check that data.
Thanks, Chris.
Peter, I think you had a query, and then Nick Draper.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Query about bus lanes. TfL moved quite quickly to convert their bus lanes to 24/7. There was some publicity, but certainly no consultation. I just wondered whether we had any thoughts about the bus lanes that we control. Hartfield Road would be an example, and as to whether we're thinking about perhaps converting those to 24/7.
So perhaps I'll deal with this, Chair. We have no current intention to introduce 24/7 for the bus lanes we control, but we'll want to keep that under review, and it will be a function of the level of congestion and whether the buses and other authorised users of the bus lanes are able to travel swiftly down those bus lanes, which is the intention. So no current proposals or intention to do that, but it's one that we will want to keep an eye on over time.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Nick Draper.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Chair. And yeah, this is a really exciting and excellent initiative. But I can see I've got two questions here, Chair. First of all, I'd like to see a much wider range of examples showing who's going to win and who's going to lose out. Because if we don't do this ourselves, if we don't give an accurate picture, there are people out there, and I'm sure the councillors here do know them, who will create inaccurate pictures, and those pictures will go viral. They'll be all over the internet and everything like that, and they'll actually stop the thing happening before it happens, and the council will be cast as the devil and everything like that. So that's my question number one. Can we have a much fuller picture, please? And the second question is, seriously, will there be special cases? Low-paid people who've got a car that they just about survive on, who need those cars for essential work. I mean, for instance, people who go around the borough doing care work, or painter decorators. That's another example of low-paid work. I'm sure you can think of many more. And I'm thinking particularly of people who are quite elderly, people who haven't got money to go spending on electric cars, or for that matter, are in a position to take public transport, but who nevertheless do actually need some sort of car. Okay, those are the two questions.
Perhaps, Chair, I'll start the response, and Ben may wish to add. But certainly, I think it's a helpful suggestion that we have some more examples, and we can put those onto the website so that residents, motorists can better understand how it might apply to them. So I'll ask Ben if he can arrange for that to be done. And with regard to the second question, I suppose it's worth prefacing this by saying that we have completed an equality impact assessment. We've looked in detail at the equalities implications, and we will ensure that we follow the appropriate legislation, and that is alongside the decision that members will be asked to make after this consultation. But to deal with the specifics that you included in there, the council already has a carer's permit, and will continue with that. And we have permits for trade and business users, but we don't have a permit that reflects low pay. And that's not a protected characteristic, nor is it an approach that's been adopted by the authority in the past. So that would be a diversion from our current policy and isn't within the proposals that we have at present.
If I may comment very briefly, a carer's permit, I believe, may well be free, but a small businesses permit you do have to pay for. Will the small businesses pay a permit? Will the charges go up there?
Yes, they will, and I'll let Ben just add to that. Because it depends on the vehicle, but potentially they would go up depending on the emissions from that vehicle. But Ben may wish to add.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said at the start, all the types of permit we have, residential, business, trade, I can't think, but there are 2 or 3 others. So this model has been applied to all of those. So if a business does have an electric car, for example, their business permit or their trade permit would certainly be cheaper than what it is now. There's no doubt about that. So yes, it's across the board, those charges. And I think Chris did answer. I was going to mention the equalities impact assessments, done that, and blue badges and the carers. So absolutely, those have been picked up already. They're the areas.
Thank you, both of you.
Chris, I understand you have some separate questions received by email.
That's right. Was it one in the chat that was sent to me directly from David, who's on the call, who wants to know if their stock of visitor scratch cards will continue to remain valid after the introduction of new levies. Sorry, new classes.
Yes, we would certainly honour the existing scratch cards that are in circulation.
Great. And then one that came by email. Has anyone considered putting any additional charges raised into our roads? And they gave the example of low traffic neighbourhoods or cycle lanes to help fund the changes needed in our roads. This might affect the attitude of Morden residents towards the proposed new charging scheme.
So I'll take that, Chris. Thanks for the question. It's worth clarifying that all of the revenue generated from parking income by law has to be used in the first instance for transport purposes, and that's very prescribed. So some of the money already generated goes into the roads, and we would continue that approach. And indeed, there's a virtuous circle here in using any additional revenue that would be generated to invest in the sort of infrastructure necessary in order to continue this behaviour change. We know that we need more cycling infrastructure, we need better quality pavements, we need better transport infrastructure generally. Step-free access at train stations, for example, have come up at the Rains Park Forum. All of those are absolutely necessary. Not many of them can be afforded in full at the present time, but this would potentially provide us with the resource to invest in some of that infrastructure, as it has to be by law. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crowe.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I think we can all see and understand the rationale for emission taxes. I think they're a good thing, but it's axiomatic that such taxes should be fairly applied. And it seems to me that the current proposal discriminates against people who are currently in CPZ areas. So my question is this: would it not be fair and would it not be possible to put all the areas that currently are not in a CPZ into one large CPZ and perhaps make no charge for parking or minimal charge for parking, but or include also a fair admissions charge? By doing something of this type, what we would effectively do is ensure that every parked car in the borough paid an admissions tax, and it strikes me as a fairer and better proposal. And I wonder what officers think of that.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Crowe. The current controlled parking zone arrangements that we have are based on the principle of residents petitioning for those controlled parking zones. So the council doesn't introduce them unless they're demanded. And I think that's an important principle to recognise. And the change that you describe, whilst I can see the logic in terms of its equality and fairness, given its universal coverage, would break that policy and would impose a CPZ on residents who currently don't believe they need one, purely for the purposes of then imposing a tax on them. Now we are treating only those CPZs that are in existence at the moment. And so what you're seeking would require a change of policy, which I would suggest you submit as part of the consultation process. And that would need to then be considered by members in due course through the scrutiny process and through Cabinet. But it would be a significant departure from the policy that we currently have, which is, as I say, based upon demand, and that demand is driven by residents' perceptions about the pressure on parking in their area. And that's predominantly in those areas which are close to commuter zones or other town centre attractions, for example. Some parts of the borough don't enjoy those benefits as we might see them, and therefore don't require a CPZ at the present time. So as I say, it would be a departure, and one which I suspect would not be wholly welcomed in those areas.
Thank you, Chris. Are there any more questions on this item? I can't see any, but thank you very much, all of you. Agenda item 4 is COVID-19 update. Barry Causer, Head of Strategic Commissioning. Excuse me, my writing is terrible. For public health. So Barry.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm here. Apologies for joining the meeting late this evening.
That's all right.
I was delivering a community champions event that finished at 8 p.m. So I will cover those shortly for you. But Chris, I think you have some slides for us. So thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure to join you this evening. My name is Barry Causer. I'm the Head of Strategic Commissioning in the Morden Public Health team. Next slide, please, Chris. Aims and purpose of the time with you this evening. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the key COVID-19 messages related to Morden this week. Bit of an overview on outbreak control, the plans that we have in place, the operational groups, what we do on surveillance, on cases, etc. And then really importantly, I'm going to talk about those important key messages for community involvement and action, and particularly about how we can mitigate health harm of COVID-19 within the borough. And really delighted to talk to you this evening about the Morden Community Champions. So I'll tell you about that a little bit in a bit of time, and then any questions that you may have for me. Next slide, please, Chris. Excuse me, sorry. Key messages this week. As many of you will know, has been much in the press that there has been a new national 3-tier system of coronavirus restrictions that has been introduced, and that the national alert level is applied to London as a whole rather than individual boroughs. And as you will know, the current level within London and so Morden is medium. So the 3 tiers, very briefly, colleagues, is that medium is for areas where national restrictions continue to take place. That's the lowest level of the 3-tier system, and that's where Morden is right now, along with the rest of London. Then the next level up is high, and this is for areas with higher level of infections, where additional restrictions on top of those in place for medium are put in place. One example, just one example of those, is about not socializing with anybody outside your household or your bubble in any indoor settings. And then that 3rd tier is very high, and that's for areas with very high levels of infections and tighter restrictions that build on those that are at high. And the example that's in the press a lot is about pubs and bars must close unless they are serving substantial meals. Second point on the slides there, I'm going to try not to read them to you because I know you can see them, but really that the cases of COVID-19 in Morden and London have increased significantly in recent weeks. If the trend continues, the London alert level is likely to be escalated. Councillors, colleagues, residents, now is the time for us to take action. It really is. And that was the message I was just giving to our health champions just a few minutes ago. What I can tell you a bit more about the data, and many of you will see separate reports, but the rates of infections are increasing across all of Merton. But what we are seeing is slightly higher rates of cases in the west than in the east. They are very small numbers though, colleagues, and it's hard to draw conclusions on that just yet. We are reviewing the data on a regular basis, on a daily basis, as you would expect. But then also we have seen an increase in positive cases in younger people, so 18 to 29s, but also working age residents, so 30 to 65. At this stage, we haven't seen a substantial increase in positive cases amongst older people, which is a positive thing. And a key message here is about how those transmissions are taking place at the moment. And this is from community transmission. So what this means is that it's transmission of the virus within and between households. And that's a really important thing for us to retain, because that's why when the 3-tier system is talking about medium, high and very high, it's adding additional restrictions to prevent household mixing. It's in direct relationship to that, the evidence that shows us that it's community transmission that is resulting in high cases. We need to take action now. I have nothing new to tell you about how we can prevent transmission of COVID-19, unfortunately. The most simple and the effective ways of stopping the spread remains the things that we've all heard. It's about following the guidance, but it's about social distancing. It's that rule of 6. It's about wearing face coverings and washing our hands. Really importantly, it's about self-isolation. As soon as if you get symptoms, even if you're not too sure, but it's one of those key symptoms of COVID-19, please self-isolate and request a test. So self-isolate immediately if you have symptoms, if you're tested positive, if you live with someone that has symptoms or has had a positive test. But again, also self-isolate if NHS Test and Trace contact you by telephone, text or email asking you to do so. Test and Trace protects us, it protects our families and our communities. Final key message from me is that the COVID-19 app, again, lots in the press about the app, but it's been downloaded 14 million times so far. It's getting better. I updated the app on my phone, updated it for me this morning, and they've added additional languages and additional functionality. It's getting better. It helps protect us. The more people that download it, the better it works. Next slide, please, Chris. This is an infographic that simply shows us the local COVID alert level. The text is extremely small. Apologies. This was the best infographic I could get yesterday when the slides were presented. I will send this out with the minutes or the link for this so you can see it. But essentially what it tells us is what we can and can't do at this COVID alert level. Okay, which is the same messages that we've had over the last few weeks about rule of 6. It explains that shopping and retail is still open, leisure and gyms are open, healthcare services are open, places of worship are open, but bearing in mind those key guidance about hands, face and space. Next slide, please, Chris. Outbreak control plan. We published our Merton local outbreak control plan back in June. The outbreak control plan straddles 2 departments of the council, so environment and regen and community and housing. I know that Chris Lee's with us this evening. That's the link to the outbreak control plan. The purpose of the plan is to complement NHS Test and Trace to minimise virus spread. We've worked hard to identify high-risk settings and vulnerable communities and working with them proactively to prevent outbreaks of COVID-19. Some of the themes within that plan are around care homes and what we're doing to protect our care homes in the most vulnerable communities, our schools, other high-risk settings. But it also covers things about local testing capability, contact tracing, and how we really protect our vulnerable people. There's a weekly outbreak control group by senior officers across the council that looks at surveillance and data, and importantly has a key component of that about outbreak community engagement and communication. So that outbreak control group is jointly chaired by Dr. Dagmar Zuna, our Director of Public Health, and Kath James, Assistant Director of Public Protection, who I think is on the call too. Outbreak control plans in place between now and the end of March, and that's intentional because, as you will know, we are facing a very tricky autumn and winter. It's getting a little bit colder outside. People are spending a little bit more time indoors. Coughs and splutters start, and that increases the risk of transmission of the virus. So we have a plan. Next slide, please, Chris. But then thinking about community action for outbreak prevention. So we need to remind ourselves of the symptoms. I've touched on these earlier, but high temperature, a new continuous cough or loss or change of smell or taste. I hope you don't mind, I'll share a personal story. I think it was last week, my daughter was having her breakfast and said her shreddies tasted a bit weird. She's 7. I said, okay, fine. Gave her some toast, said toast's a bit weird too, and her yogurt was a bit weird. So instantly we isolated the entire family. My wife didn't go to school, she's a teacher. My other daughter stayed at home too, and we requested a test. Within 2 days, that test result came back and it was fortunately negative. But they're the symptoms and those are the messages to pick up within our households at the moment. If you are symptomatic, to get a test, you can phone 119 or contact the web address there. Testing capacity across London has increased. It has got better or easier to access a test. NHS test and trace, again, thinking about this community action, these are the messages we need to get to the community. If London is at this tipping point, we need to make some action. So if positive case, you'll be contacted by test and trace, and you'll be contacted by email, text or phone and asked for any details of close contacts. So that's within 2 meters for 15 minutes. Please follow up with that email, that contacts the website from test and trace. Again, it does help break that chain of transmission, and it keeps us safe. But also you might be contacted, and we need to get the message to the community that you might be contacted by test and trace asking you to self-isolate because you've been in contact with someone. Again, please follow that guidance. Community action, again, is about protecting our most vulnerable residents and being aware of potential fraud. Yeah, this is happening. There are cases across London of this type of fraud where someone would phone someone and say, yes, you've been in contact with someone with a positive case. I can arrange for you to get a test, but I'm just going to need that bank details or that long strip on your card number so I can pay the delivery fee. Clearly, this is a fraud. It's not true. These are free tests, and postage, if you get a home test, is free of charge. Final community message for community action is about to sign up to the Morden COVID-19 newsletter. If and when the risk status changes from medium to high, the newsletter is going to be a good avenue for us to contact our residents, the people that are working within the borough, to be able to access local support and information on what those guidance changes are. Next slide, please, Chris. As well as preventing cases and preventing outbreaks, it's really important for the community that we can support them to reduce the health impact of COVID. Key message, the NHS is open. If you are worried, please phone your GP, use NHS 111. Go to your hospital appointments, go to your screening appointments. The NHS is there to help us. These are really important for us. But also to look after ourselves, to get COVID fit, to reduce the risk of severe COVID. And the key things that we're seeing from the evidence is around eating healthily or losing weight, stopping smoking, and increasing physical activity levels. Physical activity is really good for us. It helps manage our weight, it helps produce positive endorphins, and it also brings people together in a positive way, reminding ourselves of that rule of 6. But really importantly for me, I think that we do have good services within Morden. We've got good stop smoking services that can support our residents and those people that live in the borough and work in the borough to be able to stop smoking effectively. I'm working with our NHS colleagues on long-term conditions. So I had a number of conversations with our lead GPs today around tackling diabetes within the borough. We've done a huge amount of work in the borough on tackling diabetes through our Health and Wellbeing Board. But managing those long-term conditions is a really important component of reducing health impact of COVID. And COVID is not just about physical health, it's about our mental health and well-being. It's been incredibly difficult over the last 6 months for many of us, particularly some groups that have had a disproportionate impact. Again, we do have those services that can support, and we need to do more, and we're working on those messages to reach those vulnerable people to provide mental health support. Final message on reducing that health impact, and again, much of this has been in the press recently, and we're promoting really strongly that if you are offered to get a flu jab, please take it. This is the year to do so. There is a phased approach to the flu jab within the country, and so please take up that flu jab offer if you get the offer. Next slide, please, Chris. Community champions. I'm really pleased to talk about this with you this evening. So we have a network of community champions in the borough. This is a key part of our local outbreak control plan. If we are going to prevent outbreaks, if we are going to mitigate harm, it has to be in partnership with the community. It's got to be with our residents, with our thriving voluntary sector. And this was in direct response to, we had a community engagement workshop back in August, and we heard that the community told us loud and clear, we want to take a part, we want to play a role in tackling COVID, but we also want to tell you what we think. So anyone who lives or works in Morden who wants to help stop the spread of COVID-19 and can share clear and consistent messages from ourselves in public health and the NHS can be a champion. We have over 80 now. We've got another 3 people that have registered today. So we've got 80 community champions who are residents, councillors, service providers, council officers, NHS officers, a huge number of our voluntary sector representatives. We've got clinicians and pharmacists and doctors and more. So this is the approach. Next slide, please. What the champions do, we meet them twice a week. So on a Wednesday at 12 noon till 1 and 7 p.m. till 8 p.m, we have a drop-in session. So people can drop in to hear about our key messages, and we have a theme. So this evening, today, we had 40 of our community champions dropping in. And the theme tonight was about enforcement and engagement. So we had Nick Stevens from Regulatory Services talking about businesses and how businesses and workplaces are COVID secure. And Roger Aditi, Superintendent from the Metropolitan Police Service, talking about enforcement and fines and the approach that the Metropolitan Police Force take. So we have a drop-in session, and that on a Wednesday. Then on a Friday, we send our community champions infographics or a PDF or a short email or even a WhatsApp group that's been set up by the champions, just to say these are the key messages for this week. This is where you can access a test. Don't forget, these are the symptoms. It's our way of increasing the reach of our key comms and engagement messages across the borough. And then our champions send us emails, text messages, they send things on the chat as well to really feed back to us on what they're seeing within the community so that we can respond to keep our communities safe. Next slide, please, Chris. I would encourage you to register to become a champion. I'd love to have you as members of the Champion Network. Our contact details are on the slides there. But also think about the reach and the networks that you have. I know that there are many councillors with us this evening. If you have your local newsletter or WhatsApp groups or Facebook or Twitter accounts, please help us to promote that community network of community champions, because we're always looking to increase the number of people that are taking part. Next slide, please, Chris. This is the last slide from me. It's just a reminder. It's our top 6 tips for Londoners. These are from Public Health England, London region. I won't go through these, but this is an example of one of the images that we send out to our community champions so that they can very quickly and easily just forward it onto their WhatsApp network or via their emails. So thank you for listening this evening. I think the next slide is just my contact details. But I will do my best to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Barry. Can I ask if anybody has any questions? Anybody?
Barry's always very comprehensive, Madam Mayor.
Sorry?
Barry's always very comprehensive.
Yes, yes, it was.
I'm sure we can get hold of the slides as well.
Absolutely. Okay. No questions. And the last item is date of the next meeting.
Chair, I just wanted to, we spoke earlier, just do a quick update on the Boundary Commission review as we discussed that at the last meeting, if that's okay.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah.
So last time we met, and if you can remember, when we actually met in person in February, we talked about the review being done around the ward boundaries in Merton. The Local Government Boundary Commission for England has announced their final proposals for the new ward boundaries. They're available on their website, which is www.lgbce.org.uk. Those proposals will now be put before Parliament, and if approved, will be in place for the 2022 elections. So there's quite a few big changes in the Morden area. So if anyone's interested, it's worth going to have a look. They've got an interactive map that you can click on and move around.
Thank you, Chris. I know there are more changes in the Wimbledon area as well. Not so much Cannon Hill, but in the rest of the Wimbledon area. So I would echo Chris's statement. You ought to have a look at the website if you haven't already, and see what it says there. Right, if there's no other questions, I'll bring you to the date of the next meeting, which is Wednesday, the 24th of February, 2021. It's accidentally put as 2020, but that was a typo. So
it was me, sorry.
It was still a typo. So yes, 7:15 as usual. And that's unless there's any other business.
Thank you, Chair.
Did you want to speak, Stephen, or not?
No,